Hello, I can't believe it. We are on chapter 12, which means that's 1, 2, 3 chapters left. Okay, so practically we could be done with this by next week. Oh my gosh, I'm gonna miss it. It's been such a good book. And you know what I'm talking about. Our Hillbilly Elegy, classic. I made a mistake yesterday and looked up some reviews about Hillbilly Elegy. And I was like, wow, these people are whack. Because all of the reviews were saying that it wasn't good, that recommending other books to read besides this one. And I'm just like, oh, wow, this is feeling a little toxic because I don't care who you are. You cannot say that this is not a great book. This book, let's be real, 10 out of 10 every time. Okay, so we are getting into chapter 12. This is going to be where JD kind of gets more into his mom's addiction and the impact that has on the family. So let's not delay. We'll get right into it. As you can see, this is what we've covered. This little teensy bit remains. But I'm excited about the next books. They're going to be good. Okay. During my first round of law school applications, I didn't even apply to Yale, Harvard, or Stanford, the mythical top 3. I didn't think I had a chance at those places. More important, I didn't think it mattered. All lawyers get good jobs, I assumed. Sorry, I think this is going to be a problem. I just needed to get to any law school, and then I'd do fine. A nice salary, a respectable profession, and the American dream. You know that's sweet. Then my best friend Daryl ran into one of his law school classmates at a popular DC restaurant. She was bussing tables. And then here it kind of goes through how that motivated him to go ahead and apply to Yale and Harvard, because obviously if this girl is bussing tables, it means that not all lawyers' opportunities are created equal. So he goes ahead and applies to those schools. He did not apply at Stanford because one of the untraditional, unorthodox requirements for Stanford was to get a dean of your current school to write a letter of recommendation. Otherwise, you can't apply without that. And JD's like, my university was enormous. I've never even met or saw the dean of the school. There's no way I'm going to ask this person to personally recommend me when I know they don't even know me. You know, he had a group of professors that he really trusted, that he would have asked for their recommendations and did ask for their recommendations for his other applications. So I can understand that. I can see how hard that would be to have such a big part of your life dependent upon a stranger when there's already a stranger involved. Like, if the stranger's going to be on the other end, I'm not going to have a stranger on my end as well. I want to have as much control and impact on this as possible. And then, let me see. Oh, he actually brings the Stanford application to the school because he wants to give it to the dean, but he ends up not doing it because he's like, nah, it's too far out of my control. And our boy gets into Yale Law School. We're so proud of him. On my first day at Yale Law School, there were posters in hallways announcing an event with Tony Blair, the former British Prime Minister. I could not believe it. Tony Blair was speaking in a room of a few dozen students. If he came to Ohio State, he would have filled an auditorium of thousands of people. Yeah, he speaks at Yale all the time, a friend told me. His son is an undergrad here. A few days after that, I nearly bumped into a man as I turned a corner and walked into the law school's main entrance. I said, "Excuse me." He looked up and realized the man was New York Governor George Pataki. These sorts of things happened at least once a week at Yale Law School. It was like nerd Hollywood, and I never stopped feeling awestruck. That's kind of a cool experience, if you can only imagine. The first semester was structured in a way to make life easy on students. While my friends in other law schools were overwhelmed with work and worrying about strict grading curves that effectively placed you in direct competition with your classmates, our dean asked us during orientation to follow our passions wherever they might lead and not to worry so much about our grades. You That has to be a relief, especially in college. And you're worried. You're like, oh my gosh, am I going to be able to perform? Okay. Our first four classes were graded on a credit, no credit basis, which made that easy. One of those classes, a constitutional law seminar of 16 students, became kind of a family for me. We called ourselves the Island of Misfit Toys, as there was no real unifying force to our team. And this team right here, we're going to learn, is where he meets his beautiful bride, Usha Vance. So let's read on. A conservative hillbilly from Appalachia, the super smart daughter of Indian immigrants, a Black Canadian with decades worth of street smarts, a neuroscientist from Phoenix, an aspiring civil rights attorney born a few minutes from Yale's campus, and an extremely progressive lesbian with a fantastic sense of humor, among others. But we all became excellent friends. That first year at Yale was overwhelming, but in a good way. I'd always been an American history buff, and some of the buildings on campus predated the Revolutionary War. Talk about that old school. Sometimes I'd walk around campus searching for the place cards that identified ages of buildings. The buildings themselves were breathtakingly beautiful, towering masterpieces of neo-Gothic architecture. Inside, intricate stone carvings and wood trim gave the law school an almost medieval feel. You'd even sometimes hear that we went to HLS, Hogwarts Law School. It's telling that the best way to describe the law school was a reference to a series of fantasy novels. That's hilarious. Classes were hard and sometimes required long nights in the library, but they weren't that hard. A part of me thought I'd finally be revealed as an intellectual fraud, that the administration would realize they made a terrible mistake and send me back to Middleton with their sincerest apologies. Another part of me thought I'd be able to hack it, but only with extraordinary dedication. After all, these were the brightest students in the world, and I did not qualify as such. But that didn't end up being the case. Though there were rare geniuses walking the halls of the law school, most of my fellow students were smart, but not intimidatingly so. In classroom discussions and on tests, I largely held my own. And you can kind of sense what he's getting at is that imposter syndrome that most of us have a tit tat with getting into adulthood, or as you start getting into different career paths where you start getting recognized or appreciated for your contributions, and you're like, it's not even me. It was just like dumb luck that I'm here. No, it's not. And I like that he admits that, because he may today come across as some kind of force to be reckoned with, which he is. But you can still see that little hillbilly in him that has only learned through trials that he is an important person, that he has reasons to be confident, that what he has to say is very important, and that he can stand on his own. So that's just a fact that I really like that he kind of leveled with us on. Because, yeah, he's going to Yale. Not everybody's going to Yale. So I can't relate to that particularly. But with the imposter syndrome, I think we can all relate to that in some way. Okay, so not everything came easy. I always fancied myself a decent writer, but when I turned in a sloppy writing assignment to a famously stern professor, he handed it back with some extraordinarily critical commentary. Not good at all. He scribbled on the page. On another, he circled a large paragraph and wrote in the margins, "This is a vomit of a sentence masquerading as a paragraph. Fix." I heard through the grapevine that this professor thought that Yale should accept only students from places like Harvard, Yale, Stanford, and Princeton. It's not our job to do remedial education, and too many of these other kids need it. That committed me to change his mind. By the end of this semester, he called my writing excellent and admitted that he might have been wrong about state schools. As the first year drew to a close, I felt triumphant. My professors and I got along well. I had earned some solid grades, and I had a dream job for the summer, working for the chief counsel of a U.S. senator. Yet, for all the joy and intrigue, Yale planted a seed of doubt in my mind about whether I belonged. This place was so beyond the pale for what I expected of myself. I knew zero Ivy League graduates back home. I was the first person in my nuclear family to go to college, and the first person in my extended family to attend a professional school. When I arrived in August 2010 at Yale, had educated two of the three most recent Supreme Court justices and two of the six most recent presidents, not to mention the sitting Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton. There was something bizarre about Yale's social rituals. The cocktail receptions and banquets that served as both professional networking and personal matchmaking events. I lived among newly christened members of what folks back home pejoratively call elites. And by every outward appearance, I was one of them. I'm a tall, white, straight male. I've never felt out of place in my entire life, but at Yale, I did. And that is an interesting point. It's like in our patriarchal, male dominated, white majority country, how is it that a white 6 foot whatever man at Yale, but still can feel so out of place amongst all of the money in that room, all of the money, the privilege, and elitism? But it's true. And I can see it. People that I said I was reading reviews, they're like, oh, he left out other people from Appalachia, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. The thing says a memoir of a family and culture in crisis. He's talking about his family, his culture. So if he didn't include every single bit of history of Appalachia in every ethnic background of that wasn't his purpose. That's not what memoirs are for. That's what history books are for. So I know none of those people are here, but if you are, get a history book. Okay, part of it has to do with the social class. A student survey found that over 95% of Yale Law School students qualified as upper middle class or higher. Zang, there is no demographic that strong with wealth. 95% or higher. Most of them qualified as outright wealthy. Obviously, I was neither upper middle class nor wealthy. Very few people at Yale Law School are like me. They may look like me, but for all of the Ivy League obsession with diversity, virtually everyone, black, white, Jewish, Muslim, whatever, comes from an intact family who never worry about money. Early during my first year, after a late night of drinking with classmates, we all decided to stop at the New Haven chicken joint. Our large group left an awful mess: dirty plates, chicken bones, ranch dressings, soda splattered on the table, and so on. I couldn't imagine leaving it all for some poor guy to clean up. So I stayed behind. Of a dozen classmates, only one person helped me, my buddy Jamal, who also came from a poorer background. Afterward, I told Jamal that we were probably the only people in the school who'd ever had to clean up someone else's mess. He just nodded his head in silent agreement. Even though my experiences were unique, I never felt like a foreigner in Middleton. Most people's parents had never gone to college. My closest friends had all seen some kind of domestic strife in their life: divorces, remarriages, legal separation, or fathers who spent time in jail. A few parents worked as lawyers, engineers, teachers. They were rich people to Mama, but they were never so rich that I thought of them as fundamentally different. They still lived within walking distance of my house, sent their kids to the same high school, and generally did the same things as the rest of us. It never occurred to me that I didn't belong. Even in homes of some of my relatively wealthy friends at Yale Law School, I felt like my spaceship had crashed in Oz. People would say with a straight face that a surgeon mother and engineer father were middle class. In Middleton, a $160,000 salary is unfathomable. At Yale Law School, students expect to earn that amount in their first year after law school. Many of them are already worried that it won't be enough. To be honest, that sounds like a lot of our senators. It wasn't just about the money or relative lack of it. It was about people's perceptions. Yale made me feel for the first time in my life that others viewed my life with intrigue. Professors and classmates seemed genuinely interested in what seemed to me as superficially boring. I went to a mediocre public high school, my parents didn't go to college, and I grew up in Ohio. The same was true of nearly everyone I knew. At Yale, these were true of no one. Even my service in the Marine Corps was pretty common in Ohio, but at Yale, many of my friends had never even spent time with a veteran of America's newest war. In other words, I was an anomaly. So I realized that what I'm missing is a good stand. So I could read like this and not like this. But we're getting there, okay? I'm making progress a little bit at a time. Okay, here among them, what I've noted already. The one consequence of isolation is seeing standard metrics of success as not just unattainable, but as the property of people not like us. Mama always fought that attitude in me, and for the most part, she was successful. So here he's talking about that sense of helplessness instead of control. And if you feel like you're helpless, then you are. Perspective is reality. Like your perspective is your actual reality. So if you feel like you can't change, no matter how hard you work at something, you're not going to work hard. And that's what JD went over. Is that's part of the cultural um, message that's lacking in his community. Is like people don't know that they can change. They don't realize that the life that they have is their own doing. They honestly feel they've been put in that position and have no control over it. Okay. Another lesson. One second. Okay, so scratch that little piece I just did because I actually skipped ahead about 4 sentences, so I'm going to go back. So, okay. At Yale, many of my friends had never spent time with a veteran of America's newest wars. In other words, I was an anomaly. That's where I left off, okay? That's not exactly a bad thing. For much of that first year in law school, I reveled in the fact that I was the only big Marine with a Southern twang at my elite law school. But as law school acquaintances became close friends, I became less comfortable with the lies I told about my own past. My mom is a nurse, I told them. But of course, that wasn't true anymore. I didn't really know what my legal father, the one whose name was on my birth certificate, did for a living. He was a total stranger. No one except my best friends from Middleton, whom I asked to read my law school admissions essay, knew about my formative experiences that shaped my life at Yale. I decided to change that. I'm not sure what motivated this change. Part of it is that I stopped being ashamed. My parents' mistakes were not my own fault, so I had no reason to hide them. But I was concerned most of all that no one understood my grandparents' outsized role in my life. Few of even my close friends understood how utterly hopeless my life would have been without Mama and Papa. So maybe I just wanted to give the credit where credit was due. Yet there's something else. As I realized how different I was from my classmates at Yale, I grew to appreciate how similar I was to the people back home. Most important, I became acutely aware of the inner conflict born of my recent success. No one, no, sorry, on one of my first visits home after classes began, I stopped for gas at a gas station not far from Aunt Wee's house. The woman at the nearest pump began a conversation, and I noticed that she wore a Yale t shirt. Did you go to Yale? I asked. No, she replied, but my nephew does. Do you? I wasn't sure what to say. It was stupid. Her nephew went there, for Christ's sakes. But I was still uncomfortable admitting that I'd become an Ivy Leaguer. The moment she told me her nephew went to Yale, I had to choose. Was I a Yale law student or was I a Middletown kid with hillbilly grandparents? If the former, I could exchange present pleasantries and talk about New Haven's beauty. If the latter, she occupied the other side of an invisible divide that could not be trusted. At her cocktail parties and fancy dinners, she and her nephew probably even laughed about the unsophisticatedness of Ohio. Excuse me, I'm still getting over my cough, so. Okay, so unsophisticates of Ohio and how they clung to their guns and religion. I would not join forces with her. My answer was a pathetic attempt at a cultural defiance. No, I don't go to Yale Law. I don't go to Yale, but my girlfriend does. And then I got in my car and drove away. This wasn't one of my prouder moments, but It highlights the inner conflict inspired by rapid upward mobility. I had lied to a stranger to avoid feeling like a traitor. These these are lessons sorry, to draw here. Among them, what I've noted already, that one consequence of isolation is seeing standard metrics of success as not just unattainable, but as the property of people not like us. Mama always fought that attitude in me. For the most part, she was successful. Another lesson is that it's not just our own communities that reinforce the outsider attitude. It's the places and people that upward mobility connect us with. Like my professor, who suggested that Yale Law School students shouldn't accept applicants from non prestigious state schools. There's no way to quantify how these attitudes affect the working class. We do know that working class Americans aren't just less likely to climb the economic ladder, they're also more likely to fall off even after they've reached the top. I imagine that discomfort they feel at leaving behind much of their identity plays at least a small role in this problem. One way our upper class can promote upward mobility, then, is not only by pushing wise public policies, but by opening their hearts and minds to newcomers who don't quite belong. Though we sing the praises of social mobility, it has downsides. The term necessarily implies a sort of movement to a theoretically better life. Yes, but also away from something. And you can't always control the parts of your old life from which you drift. In the past few years, I've vacationed in Panama and England. I've bought my groceries at Whole Foods. I've watched orchestral concerts. I've tried to break my addiction to the refined processed sugars. You know, RFK would love that. A term that includes at least one too many words. I've worried about radical prejudice in my own family and friends. None of these things is bad on its own. In fact, most of them are good. Visiting England was a childhood dream. Eating less sugar improves health. At the same time, they've shown me that social mobility isn't just about money and economics, it's about lifestyle change. The wealthy and the powerful aren't just wealthy and powerful, they follow a different set of norms and mores. When you go from working class to professional class, almost everything about your old life becomes unfashionable at best or unhealthy at worst. At no time was this more obvious than the first and last time I took a Yale friend to Cracker Barrel. In my youth, it was the height of fine dining, my grandma and my favorite restaurant. With Yale friends, it was a greasy public health crisis. These aren't exactly major problems, and if given the option all over again, I'd trade a bit of social discomfort for the life I lead in a heartbeat. But as I realized that this new world, I was the cultural alien, I began to think seriously about questions that had nagged at me since I was a teenager. Why has no one else from my high school made it to the Ivy League? Why are people like me so poorly represented in America's elite institutions? Why is domestic strife so common in families like mine? Why did I think that places like Yale and Harvard were so unreachable? And why did successful people feel so different? Wow. that's a revelation chapter, especially about how he's saying, you know, being in that class that he is joining as a Ivy Leaguer or an elite. It's so true. Like what my dad used to say is that, it costs more to be poor. And what he meant was like, for example, if you can afford a Costco membership, you can pay less for toilet paper, you can pay less for paper towels and the essentials. You get that club discount. So it costs upfront, but then you get to save that on the back end. Whereas when you have no money, you don't have a car. So you don't have a car, you don't have gas, so you can't get to the store. So then you have to buy a ride to go to the store and then buy the more expensive toilet paper or paper towels because you're just going to the nearest store, which if it's like a drugstore, I think they mark up the prices of things like by at least 10 to 15% because it's a convenience. They're on every corner. So in that sense, that's kind of what came through for me in this chapter. And it's also hard to have that balance where it's like the people back home are going to see you differently if you are just yourself as you are now after having this education, being around these people, going to these banquets. Like, of course, in your heart of hearts and who you are truly inside is the same. Your norms are different. Like, I know even just visiting home, I now feel out of place. I'm from Oklahoma and now I live in Southern California. And the things that are normal in my family, like light bulbs being out, not everything works. There's like, you got to kick everything to get it going. And the way I live now, my husband cannot stand anything to be non functional. So everything works. If the light goes out, it's fixed instantly. He can't take it. Like, he needs everything to be working and in good condition. So when I get home, I'm like, oh my gosh, we're missing bulbs. We need to vacuum the floor or whatever. It just feels uncomfortable because I'm different now. But it doesn't say any less about what I've come from. It's just a fact of the situation. But yes, I'm sad. We only have chapter 13, 14, and 15, and they are pretty small chapters. Now we'll take a look. This teensy bit is all we have left. But I am really excited. Like I've been telling you about the other books we have to choose from for our next series. So thank you so much for tuning in. I know that your time is so valuable, and the fact that you chose to spend it here listening to me and hearing about the stories I find interesting, and I hope you do as well. So thank you so much. Ciao.